All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I am Kris. This is part 2, 8 new discoveries in JFK file dump. I finished the other video about 20 minutes ago, and I'm still confused as to the Martin Luther King thing. If you saw the first one, you know what I'm talking about. Get a little sip of my iced tea. All right. Before we get started, thumbs up, subscribe. Want to sponsor a video, click on the thanks button, donate to the channel, request a video. There you go. Part 2.
Interviewed during its investigation. One of the most revealing testimonies came from a man named Alan H. Belmont, the assistant director to FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover. And this is dated May 6, 1964, and Belmont's testimony before the Warren Commission provides a chilling glimpse into the FBI's apparent interactions with Oswald. So Belmont's statements, now part of the declassified JFK files, delve into Oswald's mysterious journey to the Soviet Union and his subsequent return to the United States. When questioned about Oswald's motives for defecting to Russia, Belmont recounted the FBI's efforts to determine whether Oswald had been recruited by Soviet intelligence. Quote, Mr. Belmont says, "The purpose of our interview with him was to determine whether he had been recruited by the Soviet intelligence, and we asked him whether he would tell us if he was contacted here in this country. He replied he would. Whether he meant it is a question. However, you must bear in mind that this man, I believe it was when he was interviewed in July of 1961 in the American Embassy, the interviewing official there said it was apparent that he had learned his lesson the hard way and that he had a new concept of the American way of life and apparently had decided that Russia was not for him. When we interviewed him, likewise, he told us that he had not enjoyed his stay in Russia. He likewise commented that he had not enjoyed his stay in the Marines." Now, perhaps even more intriguing is Belmont's firm assertion that Oswald was never an informant for the FBI. In a letter dated February 6, 1964, attached to his testimony, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover himself admitted this fact. And here's actually the back and forth between Belmont, CIA head Allen Dulles, and Samuel Stern, a member of the committee's assistant counsel. Mr. Belmont says, "This is a letter dated February 6, 1964 to the Commission from the FBI, to which is attached an affidavit by Director J. Edgar Hoover." Mr. Stern says, "What is the subject?" Mr. Belmont replies, stating flatly that Lee Harvey Oswald was never an informant of the FBI. Mr. Dulles responds, "Would you define informant?" Obviously, in the sense he knew some information as previously indicated from the previous interviews. I mean, for the record, would you just define what you mean by an informant in this sense? To which Mr. Belmont replies, "An informant in this sense is an individual who has agreed to cooperate with the FBI and to furnish information to the FBI either for or without payment." Mr. Stern says, "I take it you also would not have regarded Lee Oswald as an informant from the contacts with him that you have told us about and the other agents you have told us about." Mr. Belmont replies, "Indeed not. In no way could he be considered an informant. In no way." Now, in the summer of 1964, as the Warren Commission worked to piece together the events surrounding the assassination of JFK, there was one question that loomed. Was Lee Harvey Oswald's departure from the Soviet Union unusual or suspicious? And this question was taken on by David Slauson, a key member of the commission's staff, because he was tasked with examining the circumstances of Oswald's return to the United States in 1962. A letter dated July 3rd, 1964 from J. Lee Rankin, general counsel of the President's Commission, to Richard Helms of the CIA, reveals Slauson's efforts to reconcile the commission's findings with intelligence provided by the State Department. So Slauson expressed his initial belief that Oswald's departure from the USSR was not particularly suspicious. Quote, "By way of introduction, Mr. Slauson said that in the portion of the commission's report that he was writing, he would have to deal with the question of whether or not the Oswald departure from the USSR and the circumstances, timing of that departure, were unusual or suspicious in any way. He expressed his belief that they probably were not, and cited Soviet relaxation in such matters in the post-Stalin era. However, he wanted to be sure in his own mind that our information was not conflict with that which the commission had received from the state, since all of the information would remain in the records of the commission." Now, to move on from this, in the chaotic aftermath of President JFK's assassination, you have a man named Gary Underhill. This is so fascinating. So he apparently was a former CIA employee who made a startling claim. According to a memo from July 19th, 1967, quote, "The day after the assassination, Gary Underhill left Washington in a hurry. Late in the evening, he showed up at the home of friends in New Jersey. He was very agitated. A small clique within the CIA was responsible for the assassination, he confided, and he was afraid for his life and probably would have to leave the country. Less than 6 months later, Underhill was found shot to death in his Washington apartment. The coroner ruled it a suicide.
Of course it is. That's typical suicides are when one person, instead of putting the gun like here in their mouth or under their chin, they always just like shoot themselves in the body multiple times. That's what I've found in all the investigations that I've done, which is none, because it's no. Could it have been suicide? Sure. There's always a chance. Does it sound suspicious? Yes. Yes, it does.
The friends whom Underhill visited said he was sober but badly shook. They say he attributed the Kennedy murder to a CIA clique which was carrying on a lucrative racket in gun running, narcotics, and other contraband, and manipulating political intrigue to serve its own ends. Kennedy supposedly got wind that something was going on and was killed before he could blow the whistle on it. The verdict of suicide in Underhill's death is by no means convincing. His body was found by a writing collaborator, Asher Burns of the New Republic. He had been shot behind the left ear and an automatic pistol was under his left side. Odd, says Burns, because Underhill was right-handed. Burns thinks the pistol was fitted with a silencer, and occupants of the apartment building could not recall hearing a shot. Underhill obviously had been dead.
Okay. If you shoot yourself holding a gun, isn't like death grip? Doesn't that come in? You shoot yourself with your this is my left hand, even though it looks not. This is my left hand. I shoot myself behind the ear. My hand seizes up on that gun, and they would find that gun in my hand. So I remember that because this is a side note, but Soaked in Bleach is a documentary / thing about Kurt Cobain, and it's done by the investigator, and he has it's acted out, and he's recorded a ton of conversations. It's an awesome thing if you're interested in the Kurt Cobain suicide. Yeah, but yeah, they cover things. That's where I'm getting this from. Yeah. Yeah, if he shot himself, that gun should have been lodged in his hand, should have locked in because your muscles tighten. I say should have because that's what doctors, and all that stuff, that's what they say. I've never shot myself in the back of the head to find out how true it is. But I'm just going by the experts in the field who would know.
Several days. Now, as I mentioned, a lot of these documents are actually related to events that happened before and after the assassination. For example, there's a lot of information about U.S. operations in Cuba. So you have this declassified document dated December 18th, 1963, and it reveals Cuban leader Fidel Castro's surprising reaction to the assassination of JFK. The leader of Cuba's relationship with the United States had been fraught with tension since the Bay of Pigs and the Cuban Missile Crisis. And according to the document, Castro was, quote, very upset by the change in the U.S. administration brought about by Kennedy's death. Quote, Fidel Castro was very upset over the change in the United States administration brought about by President Kennedy's assassination. The top Cuban leadership was sure President Kennedy would not invade Cuba, and they were convinced that the policy of his administration for economic blockade and internal subversion against Cuba would not overthrow the regime.
So Castro believes that with Kennedy being assassinated, a new president coming in potentially could say Cuba did it, Castro specifically. And now he's got to deal with a whole new wave, but now the entire nation wants blood. That makes sense. Everyone's going to look out for themselves. Castro is no different, but that does make sense. So I could see why Castro would be like, no, 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 no. Do not link anything. Don't point fingers this way. Point them at yourself.
The present policy of the Cuban government, on orders from Castro, is not to attack President Johnson in public or do anything to irritate him. According to Cuban government leaders, Castro wants to wait and see what President Johnson says and does about Cuba and give him an opportunity to improve, if he feels so inclined, relations between the two countries. And with that in mind, the new trove of documents contains a lot of information about the fight against communism in Southeast Asia and Cuba, with notes about plans to overthrow the Castro regime. Again, over the years, the U.S.'s involvement in such activities, including the Cuban Missile Crisis, has invited speculation that that could have been a factor in JFK's assassination.
Sorry, I'm going to go back. As soon as I saw this picture, I was like, when was Kennedy in a wheelchair? I don't know why I thought he was in a wheelchair, but it just, yeah, he's in a wheelchair. Let me go back.
Has invited speculation that that could have been a factor in JFK's assassination. So you have a memo here with a return to CIA stamp, and it talks about a meeting with an unidentified individual labeled Ambang-1 on July 27th, 1963 out in Miami. And it's kind of fascinating to read this, but it says, with respect to a request for explosives, it reads, Ambang-1 stated that in view of my outline of strategic targets inside Cuba during our last meeting, which took place in Washington on the 21st of June 1963, he had directed to attempt a sabotage operation against the Havana power plant. Then it says, Ambang-1 asked me if it would be possible for us to arrange some means for Rogelio Cisneros to visit Guantanamo and talk to his brother, who is an employee of the naval base, and another agent of theirs likewise employed there. The reason A1 gave for the request was that they wished to inform Ramon Cisneros Diaz of the JUR plans to begin the implementation of their plan of resistance and overthrow of the Castro regime. I advised A1 that whereas I would look into this matter, as I could tentatively tell him that the chances of accomplishing this were remote. Or how about this secret memo from July 20th, 1962. In the conversation, I learned also that the DRE is expecting another ship with arms and ammunition in the near future, and a yacht which is now in a Latin American country. The yacht is for use in activities against the Castro government. The activities against the Castro government to be carried out by the DRE are expected to start within a month or 2 months at the latest. Or how about this report, presumably from the CIA or associated with the CIA, from August 1959, right after Castro assumed power. Quote, source Alberto Fernandez Hechavarria, the chief of the Cuban Sugar Stabilization Board, who has the job of selling Cuba's sugar. He is wealthy and his family have lost through Castro's economic reforms. He appears to know a lot about the agreement and also seems to have an insight into Castro. He regards Castro as some type of UNIVAC machine. That's a universal automatic computer. His mind automatically photostating details which he can and will use in the future. He says that Castro is ruthless and that nothing can stop him in his determination to do something, i.e. agrarian reform, and that he will sacrifice his friends, his family, his money, and his fortune to accomplish his purpose. It is just fascinating, historically speaking, to read this. And by the way, speaking of that, another major historical event discussed in these documents is the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., who was killed in April 1968 out in Tennessee. A man named
This made no sense to me.
James Earl Ray was convicted of his murder. And so there is a memo in this release for the director of the FBI. And it reads in part, quote, on the 16th of April, Roderick Claflin Brown, a Panamanian national born July 1st, 1917 in British Honduras, voluntarily appeared at the Department of National Investigations of the Republic of Panama and signed a deposition. And it goes on to say, while on a shore visit to the Mobile Airport on the morning of the 26th of October.
Is this supposed to be Mobile? Yeah. South Clinton Street, Athens, Alabama. It's not Mobile, it's Mobile. I'm not nitpicking. It's one of those things where I've heard other people say that and I don't know why, but I get annoyed by it. And I'm sure other people probably pronounce it Mobile because, yeah. Or Mobile. Sorry.
On to say, while on a shore visit to the Nobile Airport on the morning of the 26th of October 1962 in the company of two fellow Panamanian seamen, he was literally approached by Marvin P. Luttrell, owner of Luttrell Motor Co., South Clinton Street, Athens, Alabama, who, after ascertaining Brown was a Panamanian seaman, asked if he knew of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Luttrell inquired whether Brown was interested in employment, the details of which were unspecified. He went on to describe Dr. King as, quote, our greatest problem who is causing us much trouble. He gave Brown a business card to use in the event that he was interested in pursuing the employment offer. And then, quote, after discussions with a relative and friends in New York City, Brown suspected that the Luttrell job offer was related with assassination plans for Dr. King. Therefore, he did not respond to the Luttrell letter and dismissed the incident until the death of Dr. King in April 1968. Brown returned to Panama in 1964. Wow. And then there's just stuff in this release that's apparently regarding covert activities that, again, is just so interesting for us to see as the general public. For example, there is a memo dated July 18th, 1963 to the Chief Support Branch. The case was assigned to the district field office, and Special Agent Redacted was designated as responsible agent. It is Agent Redacted planned to place microphones in the downstairs bar in the main floor living room and a tap on the string and all the wires to a crawl space over the garage. In that latter space, which will be kept locked, he will set up two regular AC-operated tape recorders to be actuated by the two VORs obtained from Franconia and paid for by SAS. Unbeknownst to the subject and his companion, a case officer will have to service this equipment whenever an opportunity presents itself.
SAS, that's not... Okay, maybe that's SA. Okay, so maybe Special Agent Redacted, whatever that guy's name. I was like, what are the British getting involved in this? The British military?
The cover story to be used by agents during the installation is that he is working on the house at the request of the leaseor. Wow. So what does all of this mean, right? That's the main question. Does it provide definitive answers as to what really happened in Texas that day?
No.
Not really. Historians told the New York Times that they're adopting a wait and see policy when it comes to these new documents. Scholars say it could take months, maybe even years, to fully parse out all of the information in the more than 1,000 PDFs. We had a couple hours last night and this morning. Now, Tim Naftali, an adjunct professor at the School of International and Public Affairs at Columbia University, told the New York Times that after reviewing some of these documents, found that much of the previously redacted information was likely to protect CIA sources and methods and not as part of a coordinated cover-up. According to CBS, much of this could be unredacted versions of materials that have already been released, but that were blocked out in the past, with researchers estimating that there are about maybe 3,000 documents that hadn't been released in full to the public, possibly again to protect methods or identities or sources, including the identities of CIA materials. So listen, we will keep a very careful eye on this, see where it goes, but we wanted to get something out to you immediately. Our first impressions of what we could find in our initial review of these documents. Fascinating, to say the least. That is all we have for you right now.
Nothing in here blew me away because I this isn't something I've ever really taken a deep dive into. So a lot of this stuff doesn't mean as much to me. Like, there are a few nuggets here and there that are interesting where I'm like, well, why wasn't there a follow-up here? Why is MLK mentioned? But I don't know enough to have listened to some of this and been like, okay, some of it doesn't really make sense to me. But what I'm guessing is that it feels like it clutters up by dumping it. It's kind of like a choose your own adventure. Here's information. What does it mean to you? That's where I feel like it's not going to bring anything closer. It's going to make more conspiracies happen, if that makes sense. But I don't know. Like I say, I've never really jumped into JFK or the assassination to really to have even picked a side or a stance as to what I think. So to me, this just kind of throws more more clutter into it than anything else. But there are people out there who are digging through that, what I would call clutter, and they're like, yeah, but this makes sense and this makes sense. And I would love to know more, because it doesn't make sense to me. It's just more stuff. But that's because I've never, jumped into it. But what we're going on, what is that? 60 years now he's been dead? Spoiler if you didn't know. But 60 years? That's just, wow. He died in 63. Jeez. 63. I was born in 79. 16 years difference. That's crazy. I mean, 16 years is a while, but at the same time, it ain't. Okay, well, we're going to end part 2 here. I want more. This is good. I want more. I want to know. God, I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall, though, during all the talks. Just imagine. Because there's so much stuff. I'm sure even if it's released, it's going to be redacted. And then how many files just won't ever be released? Even if they'll find a way, well, we can't release that because of this or because of that, or trade secret that, happened in the 60s that we no longer follow, but we can't let other countries know that we did that, because then they would know, and then they could, The Castro thing was interesting, though. That was really interesting, because I truly believe he had nothing to do with it. And he really wanted to make sure, like, hey, look, the only thing he didn't do was pick up the phone and be like, look, I had nothing to do with this. All right? I had nothing to do with this. But, yeah. And it makes sense that he would not want, that he wouldn't have, I mean, after the missile crisis and everything like that, he probably had to believe, through Khrushchev, tensions, we're all pumping the brakes now. We're all bringing it down. We were at a 9.9 out of 10. We're bringing it down to a 7.2. We're just going to. And then this happens, and Castro, immediately he's thinking, are we at a 10 right now? Yeah, I mean, we're not far away. I mean, would they just nuke us just because? Yeah, I could see that there's. Yeah. Anyways. Apparently this was better than I thought it was now, if I keep talking about it. All right, well, I'm going to end it here. Yeah, if you get more, I want more. I really do, because that was interesting, especially all the memos and stuff. That's really interesting. Now I'm getting into it now, and it's over. I'm more pumped about it now. All right. Until next time, have a good day, have a good night. Found the button.